Touch her again. The voice came low, almost quiet, the way a rifle cocks before it fires, and you'll lose that hand before you feel the pain. The saloon went dead silent. Every man in the room turned. Every breath stopped. Because the man rising slowly from the back corner wasn't just any cowboy. He was Colt Mercer. And everyone in Black Hollow knew that name meant exactly one thing. When Colt Mercer stood up for someone, it was already too late for everyone else in the room. Before this story goes any further, if you're watching right now, do me one favor. Hit that subscribe button and drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it, because nothing about this night was going to end the way anyone expected. The blizzard hit Black Hollow without mercy. It came down from the mountains the way bad luck always did, fast, mean, and without a single warning, turning the narrow main street into a wall of white and freezing the mud solid beneath boots that had nowhere left to run. Evelyn Cross had been running for 4 days. She hadn't slept properly since leaving Philadelphia, hadn't eaten a real meal since Kansas City, hadn't drawn a single breath that didn't taste like fear, since the morning she'd discovered exactly what kind of man Nathaniel Barron really was, and exactly what her father had agreed to sell her into. She told herself she wasn't afraid. She told herself that for 4 days straight, and she almost believed it. But standing outside that saloon in the Montana dark with the snowstorm tearing at her coat and her one suitcase growing heavier by the second, Evelyn Cross finally admitted the truth to herself. She had no idea what she was going to do next. The train had stopped in Black Hollow due to the weather. The conductor said it wouldn't move again until morning, at the earliest maybe longer, depending on how bad the drifts got overnight. The other passengers had family in town, or money enough to secure the 2 decent hotel rooms before she'd even stepped off the platform, which left Evelyn standing in a mining town she'd never heard of in a storm that showed no sign of stopping, with $17 in her coat pocket and a stolen ticket that had someone else's name on it. The saloon was the only building with enough light to look like warmth. She pushed through the door. The noise hit her first rough laughter, the clatter of glasses, a piano being played badly by someone who didn't care. The smell hit her second, whiskey and wood smoke, and the particular sourness of men who worked hard and bathed rarely. Every face in the room turned toward her. Evelyn kept her chin up. She moved toward the bar the way her mother had taught her to walk into any room like she belonged there, and everyone else was simply visiting. She asked the barkeep for something hot to drink and a quiet corner to wait out the storm. The barkeep looked her over slowly. Then he nodded toward the far end of the bar without a word. She made it exactly 11 steps. "Well, look at that." The voice came from her left, lazy, amused, already slurring at the edges with whiskey. "Train must have brought us something worth looking at tonight." Evelyn didn't stop walking. "Hey!" Louder now. A hand shot out and caught her arm. "I'm talking to you, darlin'." She turned slowly and looked at the man holding her arm. He was big, wide through the shoulders, with a red face and small eyes that had the particular gleam of a man who'd never once in his life been told no by anyone smaller than him. "Take your hand off me," Evelyn said. He grinned. The 2 men beside him grinned too. "Traveling alone," he said, squeezing tighter. "In weather like this. That's not smart, sweetheart. A woman alone needs somebody looking after her." "I'm looking after myself just fine." She held his gaze. "Which is more than I can say for your grip. Let go." He didn't let go. Instead, he stepped closer, and the men on either side shifted to cut off the space around her, and the barkeep suddenly found something very interesting to study at the far end of the counter, and the piano player kept playing, and the rest of the room kept drinking, and Evelyn Cross felt the first real spike of genuine fear run through her chest like a cold wire. She looked toward the back of the room instinctively, the way you look for a door when the walls start closing in. And that was when she saw him. He was sitting alone at a corner table with a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched, and a pair of eyes that had been watching her since the moment she walked through the door. He wasn't a large man in the way the drunk was large. He wasn't wide or loud, or puffed up with the need to prove something. But there was a quality to the stillness of him that made the air around him feel different. Heavier. Like standing near the edge of something very deep, He had dark hair gone slightly gray at the temples, a jaw that looked like it had been carved rather than grown, and a scar that ran along his left cheekbone, thin and old and silver, in the lamplight that told the story of a man who had survived things most men hadn't. He was watching her the way a man watches a situation he hasn't decided to enter yet. And Evelyn, without knowing why, without knowing anything about him at all, looked directly back at him and held his gaze. The drunk yanked her arm. "Stop ignoring me. Touch her again." The voice came low, almost conversational, the kind of quiet that's louder than shouting because it means whoever's speaking has nothing left to prove. "Touch her again, and you'll lose that hand before you feel the pain." The drunk froze. The entire saloon froze. The man from the corner table was standing now. He hadn't moved fast. Evelyn hadn't even seen him rise. He was simply standing. The way a mountain is simply there, with his right hand resting loose at his side and his eyes fixed on the drunk with an expression that contained no anger whatsoever. That was the part that was frightening. Not rage, not heat, just cold, absolute certainty. "Colt Mercer," someone behind Evelyn whispered. The name moved through the room like a current. The drunk's grip went slack. His face changed, the bravado draining out of it so fast it was almost comic, replaced by something raw and pale and animal. We were just talking." "You weren't talking." Colt didn't move. "You were holding. There's a difference." He looked at the man's hand still loosely wrapped around Evelyn's arm. "I'll say it once more." The drunk let go. He stepped back. His two friends stepped back with him practically tripping over each other, and then all three of them were making their way to the far end of the bar with their drinks and their bruised pride, and their eyes pointed carefully at the floor. The saloon exhaled. The piano started up again. Colt Mercer picked up his whiskey glass from the table, finished what was in it in a single swallow, and sat back down like nothing had happened at all. Evelyn stood exactly where she was, her arm finally her own again, her heart still slamming against her ribs. She should have said thank you and found her corner and kept her head down. That was what she should have done. Instead, she walked directly to his table. He looked up when she stopped in front of him. Not surprised, just watching. Those eyes up close were darker than she'd expected, the color of river water over deep rock. "Thank you," she said. "Don't mention it." "I mean it. That could have gone badly." It wasn't going to go badly. He said it simply without pride. Just fact. "Not in here. Not tonight." She stood there for a moment. Something in his tone suggested the conversation was over. Something in her situation suggested she needed it not to be. "My name is Evelyn," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "I know who you are," he said. Her blood ran cold. "What does that mean?" "It means the barkeep told me there was a woman on the train from back east traveling alone on a stolen ticket." He wrapped one hand around his empty glass. "Whole town knew before the train stopped." Evelyn pulled out the chair across from him and sat down without being invited. "Then I need you to listen to me," she said. "Because I think I have about 20 minutes before this gets significantly worse." Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly. More like the slight adjustment of a man recalculating something. "Talk fast," he said. Yes. She talked fast. She told him about Nathaniel Barron. Not everything, not the worst of it, but enough. Enough to explain why she'd taken a ticket that wasn't hers, and gotten on a train headed for the edge of the country, instead of walking down the aisle of a church in Philadelphia like her father wanted. Colt listened without interrupting, without his expression changing much either, which was somehow worse than if he'd looked shocked or sympathetic. He just listened the way a man listens when he's deciding something. When she finished, the saloon doors burst open. 4 men walked in. They weren't dressed like miners, and they weren't dressed like cowboys. They were dressed like men who got paid to find things: dark coats, flat eyes, the particular posture of people who've learned that everything in the world can be bought if you're willing to pay. Evelyn's chair scraped back half an inch before she caught herself. Too late. She'd already looked at them. And one of them, the one in front, with a face like weathered leather and eyes that missed nothing, had already looked back. "Railroad men," Colt said quietly. "Not a question." "Yes." "They know your face." She swallowed. "The man who sent them does. He would have shown them a photograph." Colt didn't look at the men. He kept his eyes on his empty glass, and he was very, very still for a count of 3 seconds. Then, without looking up, he said, "How much do you want to go back? I would rather die." Another 3 seconds of silence. "Then stop talking," he said, "and do exactly what I do." He reached across the table and took her hand. Not gently, not tenderly. He took it the way you take hold of something you need, firm and deliberate, and his thumb pressed once against her knuckles, as if to say, "Stay still, stay calm, stop looking at them." The lead railroad man was scanning the room. His gaze moved across the tables, systematically, professionally, the way a man searches who has done it many times before. It reached their table and stopped, because what he saw was a man and a woman sitting together in the easy, settled way of people who belong to each other. The woman's hand in the man's hand on the tabletop. The man's eyes moving slowly up from his glass to meet the railroad man's gaze with the complete, unhurried disinterest of someone who has absolutely nothing to hide. The railroad man's eyes moved on. Evelyn didn't breathe for 30 seconds. When the man finally turned away, she let the air out of her lungs so slowly it almost hurt. Colt released her hand. "They'll do a full pass of the room," he said quietly. "Then they'll ask the barkeep about passengers. He'll tell them about the woman traveling alone on the stolen ticket. Then they'll start asking if anyone's seen her." "How long does that give us?" 12 minutes, maybe less if the barkeep's nervous." "What do we do?" Colt finally looked up at her. In the lamplight, his expression was unreadable, not cold exactly, but sealed, like a door that's locked from the inside. "There's one thing I can do," he said. "That makes you invisible to them tonight. One thing that makes them walk out of this saloon without you." She waited. "But you're not going to like it," he said. "Tell me anyway." He set down the glass. From this moment on, he said, his voice dropping low enough that only she could hear it across the small table. "You are my wife." Evelyn stared at him. "You're my wife." No apology in it, no softening. "Colt Mercer's wife. Everybody in this county knows that name, and nobody who works for a railroad heir is going to risk the kind of trouble that comes with touching something of mine. I am not something of yours. You are tonight." His eyes didn't waver. "Or you're theirs. Choose fast, Miss Cross. We've got 11 minutes now." She chose. God help her, she chose. When the lead railroad man made his second pass of the room and stopped at their table to ask if they'd seen a woman traveling alone. Young, well-dressed, dark hair. Colt looked up at him with the same slow, total disinterest as before. "My wife," he said. He reached over without looking at Evelyn and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with a touch so unhurried, so completely natural, that she nearly forgot it wasn't real. "She's been with me since the train stopped," Colt said. "We've been sitting here for the better part of 2 hours. I don't make a habit of noticing other women when mine is in the room." The railroad man looked at Evelyn. She smiled at him, the kind of smile that costs everything to hold steady. "Long trip," she said. "We're both exhausted." The man looked between them for 3 long seconds. Then he moved on. They sat at that table for another 40 minutes, until the railroad men gave up their search of the saloon and moved on to other buildings. Colt ordered 2 more whiskeys, one for himself, one he placed in front of her without asking. She drank it, all of it. Neither of them spoke much. At some point, the piano player finally hit the right notes on something, and the drunk who'd grabbed her arm earlier left through the back with his friends, and the blizzard outside kept howling, and Evelyn Cross sat across from a man she'd known for less than an hour, who had just told 3 railroad enforcers that she belonged to him. She thought about what that word meant to her. Belonged. What it had meant in her father's house. what it had meant in Nathaniel Barron's smile when he'd looked at her across the dinner table like she was a painting he'd already purchased. Then she looked at Colt Mercer, who was staring at the window with the expression of a man working through something difficult, and she thought, this is different. She didn't know why she thought that. She didn't know him. She didn't know anything, except that when he'd put his hand over hers, it had felt like a door closing between her and something that wanted to hurt her. She kept that thought to herself. "Thank you," she said again when they were the last ones at their end of the bar. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "They'll be back. Men like that don't stop because they hit one dead end." "I know. They'll check the hotel, both of them. They'll go room by room if they have to." "I know that too." He turned and looked at her directly for the first time since they'd been sitting together. His eyes moved across her face in a way that was thorough without being unkind, reading her the way you read terrain before you cross it. "You said you'd rather die than go back," he said. "I meant it. I believe you." He paused. "I've got a ranch, 6 miles out of town up in the hills. Nobody goes out there unless I invite them, and I don't invite people." Evelyn waited. "It's one night," he said. "The storm breaks by morning. The train runs again, and you get on it headed somewhere else, and you don't look back. And in exchange—" He was quiet for a moment. "Nothing," he said. "No exchange. You're not in a position to offer me anything I need." He said it without cruelty, just as a fact. "But I'll tell you what the arrangement is. You come to my ranch tonight, you keep up the story, and at sunrise you're gone. No emotions, no questions, no—" He paused as if choosing the next word carefully, complications. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. "You make a habit of this rescuing women from railroad men." "No." "Then why?" He was silent for longer than she expected. "I don't like men who use their money to own people," he said finally. "Simple as that." She looked at him for a moment. Then she picked up her suitcase and stood. "All right, Colt Mercer," she said. "Lead the way." Why? They rode out of Black Hollow in the dark and the snow, and if anyone watched them go, they saw exactly what they were supposed to see. A man taking his wife home through the storm, moving together the way people do when they've done it 100 times before. The road into the hills was rough, and the wind cut sideways, and Colt rode slightly ahead without speaking, which was fine, because Evelyn didn't feel like speaking either. She was thinking about her father. She was thinking about the letter he'd sent 3 weeks ago, the one she'd read standing in the hallway of his house in Philadelphia, her hands perfectly still, because she wouldn't let them shake. The letter that explained in careful apologetic language that the arrangement with Nathaniel Barron had been finalized, and that her feelings on the matter were unfortunately no longer a factor that could be considered. She was thinking about how long she'd been a daughter before she decided to become something else. About halfway up into the hills, Colt reined in his horse, and she pulled up beside him. "2 things," he said, still facing forward. "All right. The men who work my ranch, they'll accept the story without question. You don't have to convince them. But you'll behave like you mean it when they're around because I'm not explaining myself to my own people." "Understood. And the second." He finally turned and looked at her in the dark. The snow had settled on the brim of his hat. In the cold, his breath came out in slow, even clouds. "My nephew lives with me," he said. "Noah. He's 9 years old. He lost his parents 8 months ago." A pause. "He's a quiet boy right now. He doesn't need to know this isn't real. So whatever else you do, don't give him reason to get attached to something that isn't going to stay." There was something in the way he said it flat, controlled the same level voice he'd used for everything else that struck Evelyn somewhere low in the chest. He wasn't asking her to protect himself. He was asking her to protect a 9-year-old boy from another loss. "I understand," she said quietly. He nodded once, turned back toward the trail. They rode the rest of the way in silence. Chicked. The ranch appeared out of the dark gradually. First the shape of the big barn, then the main house with its wide porch and 2 warm squares of lamplight in the windows. They'd left a light on for him. That detail, small, domestic, almost heartbreaking in its ordinariness, caught Evelyn completely off guard. A young ranch hand named Pete came out to take the horses and stopped short when he saw her. His eyebrows went up. "Evening, boss. Didn't know you were bringing—" "My wife?" Colt said, swinging down from the saddle. He said it exactly the way he'd said everything else, flat final, not open for discussion. Storm came in fast. She was on the train. Pete looked between them. Then he nodded, his face settling into careful neutrality. "I'll get the horses settled," he said. Marta left supper on the stove. Colt moved toward the house without waiting. Evelyn followed. The inside of the house was warmer than she'd expected, and more lived in than she'd feared. It didn't have the feel of a bachelor's fortress. It had the feel of a place that was trying to remember what it was like to be a home. Dishes in a cabinet. A worn quilt over the back of a chair. A row of small boots by the door that could only belong to a child. A woman in her 50s came out from the kitchen, broad-shouldered, quick-eyed, with the particular no-nonsense energy of someone who had run a large operation for a very long time. "Marta," Colt said, "my wife needed a warm place to ride out the storm." Marta looked at Evelyn with eyes that took in a great deal in a very short time. "Supper's on the stove," she said. "I'll make up the room." "The room's fine as it is," Colt said. Marta looked at him steadily for a moment. "I'll put fresh sheets on it anyway," she said, which was apparently not a negotiation. She disappeared back toward the kitchen. Evelyn turned to find Colt watching her with that same sealed expression. "She doesn't believe you," Evelyn said quietly. "Marta doesn't believe anything until she decides to," he said. "It's her best quality." A door opened at the far end of the hall. The boy who appeared was small for 9 and dark-haired, with Colt's same coloring. Evelyn noticed, though his eyes were different. Lighter. More open. He was wearing a nightshirt and wool socks and holding a book against his chest with both arms, the way children hold things they want to keep safe. He looked at Evelyn, then at Colt, then back at Evelyn. "Who's she?" he said. "Her name's Evelyn," Colt said. "She'll be staying tonight." "Why?" "Because the storm's bad, and she needed somewhere warm." Noah considered this. He had the particular gravity of a child who had been through enough that he'd stopped accepting easy answers as quickly as other children did. "Are you nice?" he asked Evelyn directly. She didn't laugh. She didn't smile in the way adults smile at children to seem less threatening. She just looked at him straight. "I'm trying to be," she said. "Some days are better than others." Noah appeared to find this acceptable. He looked at the book in his hands. "I was reading," he said to no one in particular. "Then go read," Colt said. "It's late." The boy retreated back down the hall. Evelyn heard a door close softly. She stood in the middle of Colt Mercer's house in the middle of a Montana blizzard with a stolen ticket in her coat pocket and a fake marriage that was supposed to end at sunrise. And somewhere outside 6 miles down the mountain, men with photographs were still looking for her. They didn't talk much over supper. Marta served without comment and disappeared, which felt deliberate. Colt ate methodically the way men eat when they're fueling something rather than tasting it, and Evelyn ate because she hadn't properly eaten in 2 days, and her body had stopped asking politely about it. At some point, Colt set down his fork and looked at her across the table. "You said your father arranged this," he said. "The marriage." "He did. And you didn't know, before you read the letter." "I suspected Nathaniel wasn't what he pretended to be." She picked up her coffee. "I didn't know my father had already signed papers." Colt was quiet for a moment. "What kind of papers?" Evelyn looked at him steadily. "The kind that transfer a person the same way you'd transfer a deed." Something moved behind his eyes, gone before she could name it. "You have somewhere to go," he said. "After sunrise. When you leave here. I'll figure that out." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have right now." She kept her voice level. "Is that going to be a problem?" He studied her for a moment longer than was comfortable. "No," he said. "It's your life." He stood and took his plate to the kitchen, and Evelyn sat alone at the table with her coffee going cold, and the wind against the windows, and the strange disorienting sense that the most dangerous night of her life had somehow also become the first night in months that she felt anything close to safe. She told herself that was just exhaustion. She told herself that very firmly, and almost believed it. Marta had put fresh sheets on the main bedroom and made up the narrow cot in the small adjoining room without being asked. When Evelyn came down the hall, Colt was standing in the doorway looking at the arrangement. "She's thorough," Evelyn said. "She always has been." An awkward silence settled between them, the particular awkwardness of two people who have been performing something all evening and are now alone with the performance finished. "I'll take the cot," Evelyn said. "Take the bed," Colt said. "I've slept on worse than a cot." He said it with the total disinterest of a man reporting the weather. "At sunrise, I'll have Pete saddle a horse. The train station's a straight ride down the main trail." He started to move past her down the hall. "Colt." He stopped. She wasn't sure why she said his name. She wasn't sure what she'd intended to follow it with. "You didn't have to do any of this," she said finally. He was quiet for a moment. His back was to her, and he had one hand on the wall, and in the lamplight, the scar along his cheekbone was very visible, silver and old and entirely indifferent to itself. "No," he agreed. "I didn't." He moved down the hall, and she heard his door close. Evelyn stood alone in the room that smelled like cedar and wood smoke, and something she couldn't name, something old and masculine and strangely steady, and she sat on the edge of the bed with her coat still on. She thought about what the morning would look like. She thought about a 9-year-old boy with careful eyes and a book held tight against his chest. She thought about 6 miles of frozen mountain between her and the men who were paid to find her, and she thought one last time before exhaustion finally pulled her under. One night. Just one night. At sunrise you ride. Outside the blizzard held, and deep in the Montana hills in a house that was trying to remember how to be a home. Evelyn Cross finally slept, while downstairs in a chair by the fire, with a glass of whiskey he never touched. Colt. Mercer sat awake all night and watched the door. He was still in that chair when she came downstairs before dawn, still in his coat. The whiskey glass on the floor beside him untouched. The fire had burned down to coals, and Colt Mercer sat with his elbows on his knees and his eyes on the door like a man who'd spent the whole night having a conversation with himself that hadn't gone well. He looked up when he heard her on the stairs. His expression didn't change, just registered her presence the way it registered everything quietly and completely. "You didn't sleep," Evelyn said. "I don't need much. That's not what I asked." He looked at her for a moment. Then he stood slowly, the way men stand when their body is older than their stubbornness wants to admit, and moved toward the kitchen. "Coffee's on," he said. She followed him. The kitchen was warmer than the main room, and the light coming through the window was the thin, gray pre-dawn light that makes everything look like it's holding its breath. Colt poured 2 cups without asking and set one on the table in front of her. She wrapped both hands around it and waited. "They didn't come up the mountain last night," he said, pulling out the chair across from her. "I'd have heard the horses." "You were listening for that all night?" "Yes." "Why?" He looked at her like the question was strange. "Because you're on my property." "I'm a stranger on your property," she said. "Who you've known for approximately 8 hours. That's not a reason to lose a night's sleep." Something in his jaw shifted. "I have my reasons." "Tell me one of them." He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "I knew a man once. Good man. Had a family. His wife got caught up in a situation a lot like yours, powerful man, legal papers, nowhere to run." He picked up his coffee. "I wasn't there when it mattered. I've been there since in my head, replaying it." He set the cup down. "I wasn't going to not be there again." Evelyn looked at him. "What happened to her?" She went back. His voice was flat. "She didn't have a choice." "And the powerful man," Colt's eyes were very still. He got what powerful men usually get. Everything he wanted. For a while. The weight in that last sentence sat between them like something solid. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said. "Don't be. It was a long time ago." He stood up. "Eat something before the hands come in. Marta left biscuits in the oven." He was already moving toward the door. "Colt." He stopped for the second time. She noticed he always stopped when she said his name, not out of politeness, she thought, but out of something more involuntary. Like the word caught him off guard every time. "Sunrise," she said. "You said at sunrise." "I know what I said." "The storm hasn't broken." He looked at the window. The gray light was thicker now, almost white, and she could hear the wind still working hard against the eaves. "No," he said. "It hasn't." "Then what happens?" He turned back to her slowly, and for just a moment, just one. His expression did something she hadn't seen it do yet. It opened slightly, like a window someone pushed out a crack before they thought better of it. "I don't know," he said honestly. Then he walked out. The hands came in for breakfast at first light, 6 of them rough-edged, weather-worn men who moved with the particular ease of people who'd worked together long enough that words weren't always necessary. They stopped when they saw Evelyn at the kitchen table, looked at Colt, looked back at her. "Boys," Colt said, pouring coffee like nothing in the world was unusual. "This is Evelyn. She'll be here while the storm holds." 6 pairs of eyes did the kind of rapid calculation that working men do. Taking in her clothes, her posture, her hands, the fact that she was sitting at Colt Mercer's kitchen table at 6 in the morning, like she had a right to be there. "Morning, ma'am," said the oldest one, a lean, sun-dark man named Garrett, who had the permanent squint of someone who'd spent 30 years looking at too much open sky. "Morning," Evelyn said. "There are biscuits if you want them. I put a second batch in 20 minutes ago." Garrett looked at Colt. Colt poured his coffee and said nothing. By the time the second batch came out, golden, slightly uneven, genuinely good, whatever invisible jury the ranch hands had convened, had apparently reached a preliminary verdict. Garrett helped himself to 3. The youngest one, a boy of about 17 named Danny, who'd barely said a word, took 4. Noah appeared in the doorway at 7:30, saw the kitchen full of people, and almost retreated. Then he saw Evelyn and stopped. "You're still here," he said. "Storm's still going," she said. He considered this. "Did you make the biscuits?" "I did." He sat down at the table. Yank. She hadn't planned to stay past breakfast. She hadn't planned for Noah to show her the loose board on the back porch that he'd been trying to fix for 2 weeks because Colt kept forgetting to get to it. She hadn't planned to spend an hour on her knees in the cold with a hammer and nails she found in the barn, with Noah crouched beside her passing tools, with the focused gravity of a surgical assistant. She hadn't planned for Garrett to walk past, see what she was doing, stop dead, and say, "Ma'am, that board's been bad for a month and a half." "I can see that," she said, hitting the nail cleanly. Garrett looked at her hands, then at the board. Then he walked away, shaking his head in a way that she suspected from him was close to a compliment. She hadn't planned for Colt to come around the corner of the house at that moment and stop. He stood there for a good 5 seconds, just watching her on her knees in the cold coat filthy at the elbows, hitting a nail with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done manual work before. "Where did you learn to do that?" he said. "My mother's family were builders," she said without looking up. "My grandfather thought girls should know what their hands were for." She felt him watching her for a moment longer. Then he said, "I need to check the north fence line before the ice gets worse," and walked away. But she noticed before he turned that the sealed expression had slipped again, just for a second, just enough to see something underneath it. She hit another nail and didn't let herself think about what that meant. The storm held all day. By afternoon, it was clear the train wasn't running clear, that nobody was going up or down this mountain until the weather broke, which according to Garrett's reading of the sky would not be today. Probably not tomorrow either. Evelyn helped Marta in the kitchen without being asked, and without making a performance of it. She organized the pantry, which apparently hadn't been organized since the previous fall. She found legal paperwork for the ranch piled on the sideboard in the main room, contracts for cattle sales, a water rights dispute with a neighboring property, and read through them the way you read a document when you actually understand what the words mean. She was annotating the water rights papers when Colt came back inside from the fence line, cold and snow-covered and tired in the bone-deep way of men who work outdoors in winter. He stopped when he saw what she was doing. "Those are my papers," he said. "I know. You're going to lose the water dispute if you sign what they're asking you to sign." She turned the top page toward him. "This clause right here gives the neighboring property the right to divert your creek access in dry months. You need to cross it out and initial. Don't sign it as written." He was very still. "How do you know what that means?" "I read law for 2 years before my father decided it wasn't ladylike." She set down the pen. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have touched your things without asking." Colt walked toward the table and picked up the papers. He read the clause she'd marked, read it again. "I was going to sign these tomorrow," he said. "I know. You would have regretted it in about 6 months." He looked at her over the top of the paper. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I'll make you a deal," he said finally. "What kind of deal?" "You stay until the storm breaks. You look at the rest of the paperwork I've got sitting here." He set the pages down carefully. "There are 3 other contracts I haven't been able to make sense of, and my lawyers in Billings." Evelyn looked at him. "That's not a deal. That's you asking me to do work." "In exchange," he said, with the faint stiffening of a man unaccustomed to offering anything, "you have a safe place to stay and time to figure out where you're actually going when you ride out." She looked at the papers. She looked at him. "3 contracts," she said, "and whatever else has accumulated." She pulled the stack toward her. "You have terrible filing." "I know." He went to the kitchen to eat, and Evelyn Cross sat at the table in Colt Mercer's house, reading his legal documents in the gray afternoon light, and the blizzard kept going, and nobody said the word wife again for the rest of the day. They didn't need to. Noah found her reading by the fire after supper. She'd expected him to be in bed. It was past 8, but he materialized in the doorway, the way children do when they're curious enough to override their sense of caution book under his arm. Wool socks, that same careful watching expression. "You're still reading his papers," Noah said. "There are a lot of them." He came into the room and sat in the chair across from her. Colt's chair, she realized. But Noah sat in it with the confidence of a child who'd clearly been doing so for months, and something about that small detail closed a fist around her chest. "He doesn't let people touch his papers," Noah said. "I know, he made an exception." "He doesn't make exceptions." Evelyn set down the contract she was reading and looked at him. "What do you make of that, Noah considered this with the gravity of someone taking the question seriously. "I think he trusts you," he said, "even if he doesn't want to." The fist around her chest tightened. "What are you reading?" she said, nodding at his book. He showed her. It was a collection of frontier stories, the kind aimed at boys full of adventure and horses and men with good aim. The cover was worn through at the spine. "Is it good?" "The first one is," he said. "The rest are too easy." "Too easy how?" "The hero always knows what to do," Noah said. "People in real life don't always know what to do." Evelyn looked at him for a moment. She thought about what Colt had said the night before: he doesn't need another loss. She thought about a boy, 8 months out of the worst thing that could happen to a child, sitting in his uncle's chair reading stories where the heroes always know what to do. "No," she agreed. "They don't." "Did you know what to do when you got on the train?" She was quiet for a moment. "No," she said. "I just knew I couldn't stay." Noah nodded slowly. "That's what Uncle Colt says. He says sometimes moving is the only plan you've got, and that's okay." "Your uncle is wiser than he looks," Evelyn said. From the doorway, "He's also standing right here." She turned. Colt was in the doorway with his arms crossed and his expression doing that sealed but not quite sealed thing she was beginning to recognize. "Noah," he said. "Bed." Noah went, but not before shooting Evelyn a look that was several degrees warmer than anything he'd offered when she'd first arrived. She filed that away carefully. Colt watched the boy disappear down the hall. Then he came into the room and sat in the chair Noah had just vacated, and for a moment he just looked at the fire. "He talked to you," he said. "He did. He hasn't talked much since—" He stopped. "He hasn't talked much. He's smart," Evelyn said. "Smart children go quiet when they're processing something too big for words." Colt looked at her sideways. "You sound like you know that from experience." "I was a quiet child," she said. "For different reasons." He didn't press. She noticed that about him he didn't press. He asked one question and then let the silence do what it was going to do, which was either fill itself or not, depending on what the other person was willing to offer. "He likes you," Colt said finally. Not accusatory, not warm either, just stated. "I like him," she said. Colt nodded once. Then he picked up the water rights contract from the stack at her elbow and read the clause she'd marked again. Neither of them moved for a long time. Marta found Evelyn in the kitchen at midnight. She didn't appear surprised to find her awake, just filled a cup of coffee without comment, and sat down across from her with the unhurried efficiency of a woman who has spent her life moving around large households and understands that kitchens at midnight tell the truth in ways that parlors at noon never do. "You're not his wife," Marta said. Not an accusation, just a statement of fact offered in the same tone she'd used to say the bread needed another 10 minutes. Evelyn didn't try to contradict it. "No." "Railroad men." "Yes." Marta wrapped both hands around her own cup. "He bring you up from town?" "Yes." Marta nodded slowly. "That's Colt." She said it like it explained everything, and maybe it did. "Can't walk past something that's in trouble. Never could even before the war made it worse." Evelyn went still. "He was in the war 4 years. Marta looked at the window. "Came back different. They all came back different, but Colt—" She paused, picking her words. "Colt came back like somebody had taken something out of him and put something colder in its place." Evelyn thought about the way he looked at the railroad men. That absolute stillness, that cold certainty. "What was he like before?" she asked. Marta looked at her for a long moment, reading her the same way Colt did, but faster, and with a different kind of interest. "Laughed more," she said finally. "Had plans. Was going to expand the ranch, maybe run for county council. Had a woman he was serious about." She paused. "She left while he was overseas. Married someone with more money and less mud on his boots." "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry for Colt. He'd hate that." Marta stood and rinsed her cup. "I'm telling you because you looked at him tonight like you were trying to understand something, and I figured you deserved a piece of the puzzle." She dried her hands and moved toward the door. "He hasn't let anyone sit at that table in 2 years," she said without turning around. "Not at night, not by the fire. That chair you're sitting in is the chair his brother used to sit in before he and his wife were killed." She walked out. Evelyn sat alone with that for a long time. Oh, she found out about the scars by accident. She hadn't been looking for anything. She'd been awake at 2 in the morning because the storm was doing something different. The wind had changed direction, coming in harder from the northeast, making the house creak in new ways, and she'd heard a sound from down the hall that wasn't wind. It was low, controlled. But she recognized it, the specific sound of someone trying not to make noise while pain was making noise for them. She knocked once on his door, quietly. When there was no answer, she pushed it open. Colt was sitting on the edge of his bed with his shirt off, one hand pressed to his right side, his jaw locked so tight she could see the muscle working in his cheek. He looked up when the door opened, and his first reaction wasn't anger or embarrassment. It was the look of a man caught in something he spent years making sure nobody saw. Then his face closed down completely. "Get out," he said. Evelyn stepped inside instead. She'd grown up in a household where injuries got managed and documented, and not made into a production about, and something about the familiar logistics of it overrode whatever else she was feeling. She went to the washstand. She dampened a cloth. "Don't," he said. "Old wound?" she asked. Silence. "The cold makes them worse," she said. "I know that. My grandfather had injuries from—" "I said don't." She stopped. She looked at him. Really looked without the polite avoidance of looking away. She saw what she hadn't seen before, what his shirt had covered the evidence of a life that had tried in several deliberate ways to end him. Bullet scars, silver and puckered. Something along his left shoulder that wasn't a bullet. A burn across his right side, old-heeled to a hard, shiny terrain that was large enough that she understood immediately why he kept it covered. He was watching her look. His expression was closed, braced, like a man waiting for a reaction he'd already catalogued and steeled himself against disgust, pity the particular shrinking discomfort of people who didn't know what to do with evidence of damage that bad. Evelyn crossed the room. She sat down on the edge of the bed, not beside him but close, and she held the damp cloth out without touching him. "Then you do it," she said quietly. He didn't take it. "It's just cold water," she said. "For the inflammation. You know it helps." Something in his jaw shifted. He looked at the cloth. Then he looked at her face, reading it the way he read everything, carefully looking for the thing underneath the surface. He took the cloth. She didn't say anything while he used it. She didn't look away either. She sat with her hands in her lap and let him have the silence he needed, and she didn't perform concern or offer comfort in any of the ways he would have hated, and after a while his breathing evened out. "War," he said. Eventually, without her asking. "I know," she said. "The burn was—" He stopped. "A farmhouse, outside Petersburg. We were trying to get men out." He said it the way you say things you've said to yourself 10,000 times, stripped of everything except the factual outline. "I got most of them out." Most. 3 didn't make it. Evelyn was quiet. "I've never been able to get warm since," he said. "Not properly, even in summer." He said it like he was reporting something mildly inconvenient. "The cold brings the aches back. I've gotten used to it." "You shouldn't have to get used to it." He turned and looked at her, then directly closed the way he almost never looked at anyone. This close, she could see the exact color of his eyes, which were darker than river water and older than the rest of his face. "Why are you still here?" he said. She met his gaze. "What? Tonight. Why are you here in this room? I heard—" "You heard something. You could have kept walking." His voice was low, and it wasn't accusatory. It was something else she couldn't quite name. "Most people keep walking." She looked at him for a long moment. "I know what it's like," she said, "to be in pain that you've been told to make quiet." His expression didn't change. But something in the air between them did, like a wire that had been held taut for a very long time, releasing one degree of tension. "You should go back to your room," he said. "Probably," she agreed. But neither of them moved. And in the silence of that, in the 2 or 3 seconds where the blizzard kept going, and the house kept creaking, and the cold kept pressing in from all sides, something changed between Colt Mercer and Evelyn Cross that neither of them had any idea how to undo. She stood first. He didn't stop her. At the door, she paused with her hand on the frame, and she said without turning around, "The water rights contract. The 3rd clause has another problem. I'll mark it in the morning." She heard him exhale a single short breath that in a different man, in different circumstances, might have been the beginning of a laugh. "Good night, Evelyn," he said. She went back to her room. She lay in the dark with the storm working against the windows, and her heart doing something loud and inconvenient in her chest, and she told herself what she'd been telling herself since she walked through that saloon door. One night. Just one night. But the night had turned into 2. And the 2 was showing every sign of becoming 3. And somewhere between the biscuits and the legal documents and a 9-year-old boy with a worn book pressed to his chest, somewhere in the space between sitting by a dying fire and sitting on the edge of a man's bed, while he let her see what no one was supposed to see. The architecture of just one night had started quietly, and without her permission, to look like something else entirely. Something she didn't have a name for yet. Something that frightened her considerably more than 3 drunken men in a saloon. She pressed her hand flat against her sternum and told herself to sleep. Outside, the blizzard finally slowly began to ease. And 6 miles down the mountain, the road that would take her away from here was opening back up. She didn't feel the relief she should have felt. That was the most frightening thing of all. The storm broke on the 3rd morning. Evelyn knew it before she opened her eyes. The particular quality of the silence was different. The pressure against the windows gone, replaced by the kind of cold that is clean and still, rather than violent. She lay there for exactly 60 seconds, staring at the ceiling, telling herself what the open road meant. It meant she had no more excuses. She got dressed before full light. She took her suitcase out from under the bed and set it on the chair and looked at it for a long time without touching it. Then she went downstairs. Colt was already in the kitchen. He looked up when she appeared in the doorway, and his gaze went immediately to her face, reading it the way he always did, the way she'd stopped trying to prevent. "Storm's done," he said. "I know." He set his cup down. "I'll have Pete bring a horse around." "All right." Neither of them moved. Marta came through with an armful of linens and stopped when she felt the particular weight of the air between them. She looked at Colt, then at Evelyn. Then she set the linens on the sideboard and walked right back out without a word, which was somehow louder than anything she could have said. "The 3rd contract," Evelyn said. "What about it?" "The liability clause in the middle. It's written to benefit the buyer, not you. You need to have your lawyer strike it before you sign." She hesitated. "I marked it last night. It's on the table in the main room." He was looking at her steadily. "You stayed up marking my contracts." "I couldn't sleep." "Evelyn." Something in the way he said her name, just her name, nothing attached to it, made her stop. "You don't have to go today," he said. She looked at him. "The road will be rough until midday at least," he said. "Ice on the trail. It's safer to wait until the sun's had time to work on it." He said it with the completely straight face of a man who was absolutely not manufacturing reasons, which meant he was absolutely manufacturing reasons, and they both knew it. Something in her chest did a complicated thing. "I'll wait until midday," she said. He nodded, poured a 2nd cup of coffee, and set it on the table in front of her chair. She sat down. Midday came and went. Nobody mentioned the horse. Garrett came in from the south pasture at 2 in the afternoon with his jaw tight and his eyes carrying the particular look of bad news being transported carefully. He found Colt in the barn, and Evelyn was there too. She'd come to look at one of the mares that had seemed off-footed in the cold, and she was running her hands down the animal's foreleg with a competence that had made Garrett blink when he walked in, because it was not what he'd expected from a woman in a coat that cost more than his monthly wages. "Riders," Garrett said. "Coming up the East Trail. 6 of them, not local." Colt was very still. "Armed. Rifles and sidearms, moving slow like they're looking, not riding somewhere specific." Colt looked at Evelyn. She had already gone pale, but her hand on the mare's leg hadn't moved. She kept it there steady, and Colt noticed that, and something in his expression adjusted. "How far out?" he said. 20 minutes. Maybe less if they push. "Bring Danny and put him on the ridge. I want eyes on where they go." Colt turned to Evelyn. "Come inside." "Colt?" "Inside," he said. "Now." She went. No. They stood in the main room with the marked contracts still on the table between them, and Colt said, "Tell me everything about Nathaniel Barron. Everything you left out." Evelyn looked at him. Then she sat down and told him. She told him about the dinner party in October, where she'd seen Nathaniel backhand a servant for spilling wine, and then smile his way through the next 40 minutes like it hadn't happened. About the business associate of her father's who'd pulled her aside and said very quietly that she should consider carefully what she was agreeing to and then refused to say another word because he was frightened. About the rumors and then the evidence, the actual documented evidence she'd found in her father's study that Nathaniel Barron had used his railroad money to buy land in 3 territories through fraud, through intimidation, and in at least 2 cases, through the convenient deaths of the men who'd refused to sell. Colt listened without interrupting, without his expression changing. When she finished, he stood up and went to the window. "How many men does he travel with?" he said. "Enough." She watched his back. "Colt, if he finds out I'm here, he won't just take me. He'll come after everyone who helped me. You need to understand that. He will burn this ranch to the ground and call it a legal action and have paperwork to prove it." "Let him try." "Don't." Her voice came out harder than she intended. "Don't do that. Don't be cavalier about this because you think you're immune to consequences. You're not. Nobody is. And you have Noah in this house." That landed. She watched it land, watched the line of his shoulders change just slightly. "You should have left this morning," he said without turning around. "I know that." "Why didn't you?" The honest answer was something she wasn't prepared to give him. So she said nothing, and the silence answered for her in a way she suspected was not entirely unclear. He turned around. He looked at her across the room with those dark river water eyes, and for a moment he looked tired. Not physically tired, but tired in the deep place. The place where a person keeps all the things they've been carrying for a very long time. "I'm going to ride down and find out what he wants," Colt said. "You can't." "I can ride into my own town and have a drink in my own saloon and find out what's being said." He picked up his coat from the chair. "You stay here. Don't go near the windows facing east." "Colt." "Evelyn." He stopped at the door. The way he said her name now was different from the first night. It was less careful, more direct, like a word he'd gotten used to the weight of. "I'll be back by dark." He left. She sat in the silence he left behind and told herself she wasn't frightened for him. She was frightened for him. He came back at 5. His face when he walked through the door told her everything before he said a word. Not fear. Colt Mercer didn't do fear in any way she'd learned to recognize. But there was a tightness around his eyes that was new. "He's in town," Colt said. "Nathaniel Barron. He's got 8 men legal papers signed by a judge in Philadelphia and a warrant for your return issued on grounds of broken contract." Evelyn's hands went flat on the table. "A warrant." The contract your father signed classified the marriage arrangement as a legal obligation. His lawyers framed your leaving as breach. He looked at her directly. "In the eyes of the law, at least the law, Barron's bought himself. You are technically a fugitive." The word sat in the room like something with teeth. "And the town," she said. He was quiet for a moment too long. "He's offering $500, Colt said. "To anyone who can tell him where you are." Evelyn closed her eyes. $500 was more than most men in Black Hollow would see in 3 years. "Garrett," she said. "Garrett's not a man you can buy." Colt said it flatly. "Danny neither. Pete." He paused. "Pete," she said. "Pete has a sick mother in Butte and medical bills he can't cover." Colt's jaw worked. "I'm not saying he'll talk. I'm saying I can't promise he won't." Evelyn stood up. She moved to the window. Not the east-facing one, the west-facing one, and she stood with her arms crossed against herself and thought about what $500 meant to a man with a sick mother and impossible bills. She thought about what her presence here meant for everyone in this house. For Noah. "I have to leave," she said. "No." "Colt, no." He crossed the room in 4 steps and stopped close enough that she had to tilt her head slightly to look at him. "Running is what he's counting on. You run, he catches you on open ground with no witnesses and legal papers in his pocket, and that's the end of it. Staying is what puts your people at risk. My people can handle risk. Your nephew cannot." Her voice broke on it just slightly, just at the edge, and she hated herself for it. He is 9 years old, and he has already lost everything once, and I will not be the reason. Stop. His voice was low. Stop making my decisions for me. I'm not making your decisions. I'm telling you what the right decision is. They're not always the same thing. He was looking at her with an intensity she felt physically like pressure against her sternum. Why does it matter to you what happens here? You were supposed to be gone 3 days ago. You don't owe this ranch anything. I know I don't. Then why are you still standing in my house arguing about my nephew instead of saddling a horse? The question cracked open the room. She stared at him. He stared back. And the answer? The real answer, the one she'd been refusing to look at directly since the second morning when she'd made biscuits and fixed a board and sat by a fire in a dead man's chair, was right there between them, obvious and unmovable and terrifying. Because I don't want to leave, she said. She hadn't meant to say it. She said it anyway. Colt Mercer went very still. Evelyn, I know what you're going to say. Her voice was steady, even though the rest of her wasn't. I know what this is and what it isn't, and I know I have no right to— You don't know what I was going to say. She stopped. He was looking at her in a way that was completely different from every way he'd looked at her before. All the control was still there. Colt was never without his control, but underneath it, something was moving that hadn't been moving before, and it was big, and it was old, and it looked like the kind of thing that had been dammed up for a very long time. Before either of them could say another word, Danny came through the door at a run. Riders at the south gate, he said, breathing hard. 4 of them. Baron's men. They're asking for the boss. Colt met them at the gate. Evelyn watched from the window. The safe window, the one that gave her an angle without exposing her. And she watched him walk out there alone, unhurried with his hands loose at his sides. And she watched the 4 men on horseback look down at him, and she watched none of them get off their horses, which told her everything about what they thought of their own position. The conversation was short. When Colt came back in, his face was the sealed version, the lockdown version, the one she'd learned meant the situation was worse than he intended to let on. What did they say? She asked. Baron wants a meeting. He pulled off his gloves. Tomorrow morning, neutral ground the church. And if you don't come, he didn't phrase it as optional. Marta appeared from the kitchen with a look on her face that Evelyn had come to understand meant she'd heard everything, and was already 3 steps ahead of everyone in the room. I'll take Noah to the Hendersons' farm, Marta said. First thing tomorrow. Doesn't need to be here for whatever this becomes. Colt looked at her. Don't argue, Marta said. He didn't argue. That night the house was quiet in the way that things are quiet before they break. Evelyn sat with Noah after supper and let him read to her, his voice careful and serious, the way children read when they want to do it right, and she listened, and she thought about Philadelphia, and she thought about her father, and she thought about the legal documents sitting in Colt's main room with her annotations in the margins, and she thought about what it meant that those annotations were in her handwriting now and therefore traceable to her presence. She thought about the $500. She thought about Pete's mother in Butte. After Noah went to bed, she sat alone and she made a decision. She made it the way she'd made every decision in the last week, fast, clearly, without letting herself think about what it cost. She was going to saddle a horse and leave before dawn. If she was gone, Baron had no reason to stay. If she rode south and kept riding, she could be into Wyoming before anyone knew she'd left, and Colt Mercer and his ranch and his nephew and his people would be exactly where they'd been before a train stopped in a blizzard and a desperate woman walked into the wrong saloon. It was the right thing. She was absolutely certain it was the right thing. She went to bed at 9 and lay there until 2 in the morning when the house was completely still. And then she got up and dressed in the dark and picked up her suitcase and went downstairs. She left a note on the table beside the marked contracts. She went to the barn. The horse was already half saddled when the barn door opened. She didn't hear him come in. He moved too quietly for that. But she felt the change in the air behind her, the way you feel a shift in temperature, and she knew before she turned. Colt stood in the doorway. He took in the suitcase on the ground beside her, the half-saddled horse, her coat already on. He took all of it in with one long look, and his expression went through something complicated and rapid that settled finally into something she couldn't name. "No," he said. "Colt, you were going to leave without saying anything." His voice was quiet, that dangerous quiet. "I left a note." "A note?" He said it like the word tasted wrong. "After everything after this week you left a note. I don't owe you a goodbye." "I know you don't owe me anything." He stepped into the barn and the door swung shut behind him, and his voice stayed low, but something in it had shifted. Something raw was pushing at the seams of his control, and she could hear it even if she couldn't see it. "I know exactly what you owe me and what you don't. That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" "You're running," he said. "Again. The same thing you did in Philadelphia, except this time you're running from something good instead of something bad, and you're calling it the right decision, so you don't have to feel it." The words hit her like cold water. "That's not fair," she said. "No, it's not." He crossed the distance between them and stopped too close the way he'd stood in the main room earlier, close enough that she could see the exact line of the old scar on his cheekbone. "But it's true, and you know it's true. That's why you're out here at 2 in the morning instead of telling me to my face. I'm out here at 2 in the morning because if I stay, Baron destroys everything you've built." Her voice was rising and she couldn't stop it. "I'm out here because Pete has a sick mother, and your men are being offered more money than they'll see in years, and Noah is 9 years old. Stop using Noah." His voice cracked on it just slightly, the first crack she'd ever heard in it. "Stop using him to make this about something other than what it actually is." "And what is it actually?" "You're terrified." He said it quietly. No accusation, just fact. Not of Baron, not of the ranch or the men or any of it. You're terrified of this. He held her gaze, of staying somewhere that feels like it might actually hold you. The barn went completely silent. Evelyn's heart was going so hard she could feel it in her back teeth. "You don't know me well enough to say that," she said. "I know you better than anyone's known you in a long time, and so do you." He didn't move. "Stay." "I can't." "You mean you won't?" "Colt, I have never asked anyone for anything." His voice was very low now, very controlled. "Not since before the war. Not in a very long time. I'm asking you now. Stay." She stared at him. Everything she'd built in the last 4 days, every careful wall, every sensible boundary, every piece of the architecture of just one night was failing simultaneously, and she could feel it happening, and she couldn't stop it. She grabbed him by the front of his coat. She kissed him. Not gently. Nothing about it was gentle. It was the kiss of a woman who has been holding something back for days and has run completely out of room to hold it hard and desperate and furious at herself and terrified and wanting, and none of the things a proper woman from Philadelphia was supposed to feel standing in a barn at 2 in the morning with a war-scarred cowboy who had looked at her like she was something worth protecting from the very first second. Colt Mercer went absolutely still for 1/2 second. Then he kissed her back. And it was nothing like she'd expected. Not rough, not demanding, not the reaction of a man who'd been waiting to take something. It was the response of a man who was being handed something he'd believed he no longer deserved. Receiving it with both hands, carefully the way you receive something fragile and irreplaceable. His hands came up to her face, not pulling, not gripping, just holding the way you hold something you're afraid of breaking, and she felt the roughness of his palms against her skin, and she felt his whole body exhale against hers. Years of held tension going out of him in a single long breath. When she finally pulled back, they were both breathing differently. His forehead dropped against hers. Neither of them spoke for a long time. "I'm still scared," she said. Her voice had gone quiet. "I know." His thumbs moved once across her jaw. "So am I." "That doesn't help." "No," he said. "It doesn't." She pulled back slightly and looked at his face. In the dark of the barn, he looked different from every way she'd seen him before. Stripped of the control, stripped of the sealed expression. Just a man looking at a woman with something open and raw and real that had apparently been in there the whole time, waiting for someone who wasn't going to walk away from it. "What are we doing?" she said. "I genuinely don't know," he said. She almost laughed. She didn't know when she'd last almost laughed. "The meeting tomorrow," she said. "Yes." "You're still going?" "Yes." "And Baron will deal with me." His voice didn't change. "Whatever he brought with him, whatever papers, whatever bought judges or hired men, he will deal with me. And I need you to trust that." She looked at him. She thought about what Marta had said, "Can't walk past something that's in trouble." She thought about a 9-year-old boy with a worn book and careful eyes. She thought about legal clauses she'd annotated by firelight and contracts she'd pulled from a pile, and a woman who'd spent her whole life being managed and arranged and transferred standing in a barn in Montana at 2 a.m. holding the front of a cowboy's coat. "I trust you," she said. She said it like it surprised her, because it did. He took her suitcase and set it on the ground beside the stall. He took her hand, not the way he'd taken it in the saloon, not the firm, deliberate grip of performance, but differently, the way you take hold of something that belongs to you in the best sense of that word, the mutual sense, the chosen sense. "Come inside," he said. She went. The horse stood in its half-saddled state and watched them leave the barn, which is the kind of thing horses do without comment and without judgment, which is one of their better qualities. Behind them, the Montana dark was beginning just barely at its very edges to think about dawn. And 6 miles down the mountain, in the only hotel Black Hollow, had Nathaniel Barron sat in a rented room with 8 armed men and legal documents, and $500 in promissory notes, and had absolutely no idea that the woman he was looking for had just stopped running. Dawn came in cold and clear, the kind of morning that looks innocent until it isn't. Colt was dressed and ready before the light fully arrived, moving around the kitchen with a quietness that Evelyn recognized now as the specific quietness of a man preparing himself for something, not afraid, but present in every nerve, the way you get before something that requires everything you have. She came downstairs and found him checking his rifle at the kitchen table. He didn't look up. "You don't have to go," she said. "Yes, I do. He wants a confrontation. You walking in gives him one. Not going gives him more." He set the rifle down and looked at her. The open quality she'd seen in the barn last night was still there, slightly underneath everything, but the sealed expression was back over it, like a coat put on against the cold. Practical. Necessary. "Me not showing up tells him I'm scared. Scared men make mistakes. I don't make mistakes." She looked at him for a moment. "Be careful," she said. He picked up his hat. "Careful's never been my strong suit." "I know. Be it anyway." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The suggestion of one. He put on his hat and walked out, and Evelyn stood at the window and watched him ride down the mountain until the trail bent and she couldn't see him anymore. Then she turned to Marta, who was standing in the kitchen doorway with Noah's packed bag in her hand. "Henderson Farm," Marta said. "I'm taking him now." Noah appeared behind her coat on book under his arm, with the resigned expression of a child who has been told the situation is for his own good, and suspects this is true, but doesn't have to like it. He looked at Evelyn. "Will you be here when I get back?" he said. She looked at him, at his careful eyes and his book, and the deliberate straightness of his small spine. "Yes," she said. She said it before she thought about whether it was a promise she could keep. But she said it the way she meant it, and he heard that, and he nodded once, a very Colt gesture she realized, and that realization did something complicated to her chest, and he followed Marta out the door. The house went quiet. Garrett came in 20 minutes later. "Men on the South Ridge," he said, watching the house. The meeting at the church was not what Colt expected. He'd expected Nathaniel Barron to be the kind of man you could see coming loud money, Obvious threat, the particular arrogance of someone who'd never once doubted his own position. He'd built a picture of him from what Evelyn had described and what the town gossip had filled in. He was wrong about almost all of it. Nathaniel Barron was quiet, well-dressed in the Eastern way. Good coat, clean hands. The careful grooming of a man who understood that power dressed like money rather than muscle. He was younger than Colt had expected. Maybe 35. With the kind of face that was handsome, in a deliberate, maintained way, and eyes that were pale and very still. The way still water is still because there's nothing alive moving under it. He stood when Colt walked in. "Mr. Mercer," he said. "Thank you for coming." "I'm not here out of courtesy," Colt said. "Say what you came to say." Nathaniel smiled. It didn't reach the pale eyes. "Straight to it. I appreciate that." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Please." Colt didn't sit. He put his back to the wall beside the door and stood with his arms crossed, and he watched Nathaniel absorb this adjustment with the faint recalibration of a man who reads environments well. "The woman staying at your ranch," Nathaniel said. "My wife," Colt said. Flat. Simple. "Yes." The smile again. "About that." He reached into his coat and produced a folded document. "I have here a signed statement from the Philadelphia County Clerk confirming that Evelyn Cross has never been legally married. To anyone. In any jurisdiction." He set it on the table between them. "The story is creative, but it's just a story." Colt didn't look at the document. "She's under my protection," he said. "That's not a story." Protection. Nathaniel tasted the word. "That's a noble framing. But she is under legal obligation to return to Philadelphia, Mr. Mercer. The contract her father signed. A contract selling his daughter. A contract arranging a marriage." Nathaniel's voice stayed even. "The distinction matters in a court of law. We're not in a court of law. Not yet." The pale eyes were very steady. "But we could be. And when we are the ranch, you're standing on the water rights, the grazing land, the deed itself becomes subject to litigation for harboring a contracted party in breach." He paused. "I have very good lawyers, Mr. Mercer. I've found it's more effective than having very many guns." The room was absolutely silent. Colt looked at him for a long moment. "Are you threatening my property?" he said. "I'm describing a legal outcome." Nathaniel folded his hands on the table. "I'm also prepared to prevent that outcome entirely. Walk away from this today cleanly, and this conversation never happened. Your deed stays intact, your men stay employed, and whatever goodwill you've generated in this county by playing the hero remains yours to enjoy." He paused again. "Or don't walk away, and find out what happens when a man with my resources decides someone is in his way." Colt pushed off the wall. He walked to the table. He picked up the legal document, and he looked at it for 3 seconds. Then he set it back down and leaned on the table with both hands and looked at Nathaniel Barron from a distance of about 18 inches. "I've been threatened by men who meant it," he said quietly. "They were scarier than you. They're also gone." He stood up. "Come to my property again, and I'll treat it accordingly." He walked out. Behind him, the pale eyes watched him go, and Nathaniel Barron's expression did not change in any way that a casual observer would have noticed. But one of his men standing against the wall saw his employer pick up the legal document and fold it very slowly and very precisely, and knew from long experience that the meeting had not gone the way it was supposed to go. Colt was back at the ranch by noon. He told Evelyn exactly what had happened, everything without softening, and he watched her face as he did it, and she sat with her hands flat on the table and took it without flinching, which he had stopped being surprised by. "He'll move tonight," she said when he finished. "Probably." "The men on the ridge. Garrett's tracking them." He sat down across from her. "I've sent for the Hennessy brothers from the neighboring spread. They'll be here by dark. Between them and my men, that's 12 rifles." "That's a war," Evelyn said. Yes, she looked at him. Colt, I need you to hear me. If this becomes a war, if men get hurt on my account, it stopped being on your account, he said, when he threatened my deed. She was quiet for a moment. He said something, Colt said. At the meeting. He said you were a contracted party. He held her eyes. Not a fiancé, not even a wife, a contracted party. He paused. Is there something you didn't tell me about the nature of the arrangement? Evelyn was very still. I told you my father signed papers, she said. You told me it was a marriage contract. It was. Then why is his lawyer calling it a transfer of obligation? He said it carefully, watching her. That's property language, Evelyn, not marriage language. She looked at her hands on the table. Then she said, I found a second document in my father's study, after the letter. She stopped. Tell me. My father has gambling debts, she said. Large ones. To Nathaniel Barron's family going back 11 years. She kept her voice level with an effort he could see. The marriage arrangement was how the debt was being settled. The kitchen was completely silent. You weren't a bride, Colt said. Her jaw was tight. No. You were payment. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Colt stood up. He went to the window. He stood there for a moment with his back to her, and she watched his hands. His hands that had been gentle with her last night in the barn, and she watched them close and open and close again at his sides. He knew this, Colt said. Not a question. He proposed it, she said. According to the second document, the original idea was his. My father owed money he couldn't repay, and Nathaniel offered to call it settled in exchange for... She stopped. In exchange for me. And your father agreed. My father agreed. Colt turned around. His face had done something she'd never seen it do. It wasn't the cold, controlled danger she'd seen in the saloon. This was older and deeper and entirely personal, and she understood suddenly that whatever Colt Mercer felt about powerful men using money to own people, the thing he'd told her that first night was simple, was not simple at all. It had a name and a history, and it was standing in his kitchen with pale eyes and folded legal documents, and it had been standing there in some form for a very long time. He's not getting you back, Colt said. She looked at him. Not while I'm breathing, he said. That's not bravado. That's just fact. She believed him. She believed him completely. Dates. The attack came at 10 that night. Not from the South Ridge where Garrett had been watching from the east, which is how they knew Barron had been running 2 separate operations simultaneously, and they'd only spotted one of them. Professional, Colt thought grimly when Danny came running in with the news. The man was actually professional. The barn went first. Evelyn smelled the smoke before she heard anything sharp and immediate. The wrong kind, and she was on her feet before the first shout came from outside. Colt was already moving through the door, already shouting orders to Garrett before she got to the porch. The barn was burning on the east side. The horses were screaming. Get the horses out, Colt said to Danny and 2 of the Hennessy brothers. East fence, 4 of you, rifles out. Garrett. Already moving, Garrett said. The next 20 minutes were controlled chaos in the specific way that combat becomes controlled chaos too fast and too loud and too dangerous for fear, operating on pure instinct and training and the communal efficiency of men who know their ground. They got the horses out. They got the fire contained before it took the whole structure. 3 of Barron's men were found at the east fence, and 2 of them dropped their guns when they saw the rifles pointed at them, and the 3rd ran. And then Danny came back from the house at a dead run with his face white. Noah, he said. He's not at the Hendersons. Their boy just rode up, said 4 men came to the farm an hour ago, said they had papers, said they were taking... Colt grabbed him by the arm. Where? The mining camp, north of the ridge. That's where... Colt was already walking. Boss, Garrett said, you can't go up there alone. I'm not going alone, Colt said. Get me horses. He came inside for 30 seconds, long enough to get his rifle and the pistol from the top drawer, long enough to look at Evelyn, who was standing in the middle of the main room with her coat on, and her jaw set, and her eyes absolutely clear. "Stay here," he said. "No," she said. "Evelyn, he has Noah because of me." Her voice was steady. "I'm going." He looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. Then he said, "Stay behind Garrett. Do exactly what I say when I say it. No arguments." "Agreed," she said. They rode out into the dark. May. The abandoned mining camp sat on the north ridge, like a wound that had healed wrong, old timber-rusted equipment, the particular desolation of a place that had been useful once and wasn't anymore. Barron had chosen it the way experienced men choose ground-high position, single approach, no witnesses within half a mile. He was standing in the open when they arrived, which told Colt he wasn't afraid, which told Colt he thought he had the advantage, which told Colt to look for what he wasn't seeing. Noah was there, sitting on an overturned crate with a man's hand on his shoulder, not rough, almost polite, which was somehow worse than rough. The boy's face when he saw Colt come over the ridge was the face of someone who had been frightened enough that the fear had gone all the way through and come out the other side as something harder. He was 9 years old, and he didn't cry. Colt filed that away in the place where he kept things he couldn't think about yet. 8 men. He counted them in the first 3 seconds. 8 positioned with the practical intelligence of someone who'd had military advice. Barron stood in the center with the document case under his arm and his pale eyes moving between Colt and Evelyn, with the expression of a man who has won a chess match and is prepared to be gracious about it. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "I'm glad you came. I was worried we'd have to wait in the cold." "Release the boy," Colt said. "Of course, in exchange for Evelyn returning with me to release the boy first, then we talk." Nathaniel considered this. Then he nodded once, and the man took his hand off Noah's shoulder, and Noah stood up and walked steadily, deliberately, without running across the open ground to Colt, and stopped at his side. Colt put one hand on the boy's shoulder. "Go to Garrett," he said quietly. "Stay with him." Noah went. Nathaniel watched this with the mild interest of a man observing something that doesn't affect his calculations. "Evelyn," he said then, directing it past Colt entirely. "I want you to hear this directly, from me. Because I believe you deserve the truth, even if your father didn't think so." "Don't," Colt said. "The arrangement between your father and my family," Nathaniel continued, as if Colt hadn't spoken, "was not as I imagine you've framed it to yourself entirely his fault. My father made the offer. Your grandfather had made the same kind of arrangement 2 generations earlier. It was understood in certain circles to be a reasonable solution to a certain kind of problem." He opened the document case. "You were never meant to know. It was meant to be a marriage like any other. I would have been a good husband." "You hit a servant for spilling wine?" Evelyn said. Nathaniel paused, and then smiled through the next 40 minutes, she said. "That's what I remember. Not the hitting. The smile." Something crossed Nathaniel's face, just briefly. "You're worth a great deal of money," he said. "The debt your father owes is not something that goes away because you got on a train. It transfers. To you. To whoever." The pale eyes moved to Colt, "Whoever is currently offering you shelter." Colt stepped forward. He stepped between Evelyn and Nathaniel with the deliberate placement of a man drawing a line. "No man owns her," he said. "Not your father's money, not your lawyers, not your papers." He held Nathaniel's gaze, and his voice was very quiet, and very certain the way it had been in the saloon on the first night, that particular quiet that is louder than any amount of noise. "Not while I breathe." Nathaniel looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Take him." Ta-ta. They came from the sides. 2 of them fast going for Colt's arms, and they were good. They were trained, and in the first 3 seconds they had him. And then he broke the grip on his left arm with a movement so fast and violent that the man making it stumbled sideways, and the second man got an elbow to the jaw that sat him down hard, and then Colt Mercer was free and moving, and all the careful control was gone. What was left was something older than the control. What was left was 4 years of war. Garrett's rifle cracked from the ridge, a warning shot deliberate, telling Barron's other men to think carefully about what they were about to do. And 2 of them thought carefully and put their rifles down, and the other 4 looked at each other and started backing away because Colt Mercer had reached Nathaniel Barron by then. He had him by the coat. Nathaniel was not a small man, and he was not a coward. He got a hit in hard. At Colt's left side, the bad side, the war side, and Colt took it without losing his grip and hit back with the kind of force that comes from a man who has been carrying rage for longer than this particular fight, carrying it since a farmhouse outside Petersburg, since a woman who didn't wait, since a brother and his wife on a dangerous road, since every moment of every long Montana winter spent alone in a house that was trying to remember how to be a home. Nathaniel went down. Colt went with him, and his hand was at Nathaniel's collar, and he raised his fist. And in that moment, in the specific moment before everything that came next, he felt it. Felt the shape of what he was about to become if he finished it. Felt the weight of it, the cost. Colt. Evelyn's voice, close, clear. Colt, stop. He stopped. His fist was in the air. Nathaniel was beneath him, not unconscious, but hurt, mouth bleeding. The document case scattered the pale eyes for the first time, showing something genuine. Fear. Actual fear. Colt held position for 3 full seconds. Then he stood up. He stepped back. He looked at Evelyn, who was standing 2 feet away with her hands at her sides and her eyes on his. And what he saw in them was not relief exactly. It was something more complicated. Something that said, I know what you just stopped yourself from doing. And I know what it cost. And I see you. He's not worth what it would cost you, she said quietly. Colt looked back at Nathaniel Barron on the ground. No, he agreed. He's not. What happened next happened quickly. It turned out that Pete with the sick mother and the impossible bills had not taken the $500. He had done something else instead. He had gone to 3 other ranchers in the county, men who had their own history with Nathaniel Barron's land-buying practices, and he had told them everything, and they had sent word to the county sheriff in the next town over, and the sheriff had been riding toward Black Hollow for 2 days. He arrived at the mining camp 20 minutes after the fight ended with 2 deputies and a federal warrant that had nothing to do with Evelyn and everything to do with land fraud in 3 territories and the documented deaths of 2 men who'd refused to sell. Barron's own men, the ones who hadn't run, gave statements immediately. Experienced hired men have a practical relationship with self-preservation, and the warrant made self-preservation point clearly in one direction. The sheriff looked at Nathaniel Barron sitting on the ground with blood on his face and legal documents scattered in the dirt around him. Nathaniel Barron, he said, I have a federal warrant for your arrest on charges of land fraud, falsification of legal documents, and conspiracy in the deaths of... I want my lawyer, Nathaniel said. You can have him, the sheriff said. In Billings. 2 deputies took him by the arms. He didn't look at Evelyn when they walked him past. She didn't look away. When the sound of the horses faded down the trail, she turned and found Colt standing behind her with Noah's hand in his, the boy pressed against his side with the particular boneless relief of a child whose body has stopped having to be brave. Colt's hand was on the back of Noah's head, just resting there, the gesture of a man who had not quite realized he was making it. He looked at Evelyn over the boy's head, and she looked back at him at the blood on his jaw, and the years in his eyes, and the hand resting without thinking on his nephew's head. And she thought about a note she'd left on a table and a horse she hadn't saddled. And she thought about a kiss in a barn in the dark, and a word she'd said that surprised her when she said it. I trust you. She walked toward him. She stopped close and reached up and touched his jaw carefully, where it was bruised, and he let her. And that was everything. Just the letting her, just the standing still, and letting her touch the damage without flinching away from it. You stopped, she said quietly, so only he could hear. You asked me to. You would have stopped anyway. He looked at her. Maybe. A pause. I had good reason to stop. What reason? He looked at her for a long moment with something open and certain in his eyes. "You're here," he said. That was reason enough. Noah pressed against Colt's side, said without looking up, "Can we go home now?" Colt looked down at him. "Yes," he said. "We can go home." And they rode back down the mountain together, all of them. Garrett and Danny and Pete, who had not taken the money, and the Hennessy brothers, who had come when asked through the Montana dark toward a house with 2 windows lit like eyes. Behind them, the mining camp sat empty in the cold. And somewhere in the distance, a man with pale eyes and bought legal documents was being taken to Billings to answer for the difference between what money can own and what it can't. Nobody slept much that night. They came back from the mining camp, and Marta was already at the Henderson farm when word reached her, and she had Noah back in his own bed by midnight. And she moved through the house in that efficient, unsentimental way of hers, making sure there was food, making sure there was warmth, making sure every person under that roof had what they needed, and she didn't say a word about any of it, which was exactly right. Colt sat at the kitchen table with a cloth pressed to his jaw and a cup of coffee. He wasn't drinking, and Evelyn sat across from him, and between them was the particular silence of 2 people who have been through something together and are still taking the measure of what it cost. "Pete," Evelyn said finally, "I know. You should say something to him." Colt looked at his cup. "I know that too. He had every reason to take that money. He did. And he didn't." She held his gaze. "That matters, Colt. That's not a small thing." "No," he agreed. "It's not." He set down the cloth. "I'll talk to him in the morning." She nodded. Colt looked at her across the table at the set of her jaw and the steadiness of her eyes and the slight smudge of ash on her coat from the barn fire that she hadn't noticed. He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her since the mining camp, since the moment she'd said his name in the dark, and he'd stopped, since the moment he'd understood that the thing she'd asked him to stop for was not just him. It was what she was trying to build with him. "Your coat's got ash on it," he said. She looked down. "So it does." "Mart'll get it out." "I know." She looked up. "Colt." "Yeah." "When all of this settles." She paused, picking the words carefully. "I need to be clear about something. About what I want. About where I'm—" She stopped again. He waited. She looked at him directly. "I'm not leaving," she said. "I want you to know that isn't something I'm deciding under pressure or out of gratitude or because I have nowhere else to go. I have places I could go. I have options I didn't have a week ago." She held his gaze. "I'm staying because I want to stay, and I need you to know the difference." Colt was quiet for a moment. "I know the difference," he said. "Do you?" "Evelyn." The way he said her name, that particular weight it had picked up over the last 5 days, landed in her chest exactly where he probably knew it would. "I stopped being able to pretend I didn't want you here somewhere around the 3rd legal contract." She almost smiled. "Which clause?" "The liability one." He stood up and picked up both their cups and took them to the sink. "Get some sleep. There'll be enough to deal with tomorrow." She stood. She crossed to where he was standing with his back to her at the sink, and she put her hand flat between his shoulder blades over the place where the scars were over the burn and the bullet marks and all the evidence of what had tried and failed to end him, and she held it there. His hands on the edge of the sink went still. "Good night," she said. She went upstairs. He stood at the sink for a long time after. Sig. Morning brought Pete. He was waiting on the porch when Colt came out at first light, hat in his hands, standing with the look of a man who has already written his own verdict and is just waiting for it to be read back to him. "I know what you're going to say," Pete said. "You don't," Colt said. He sat down on the porch steps. "Sit down." Pete sat. "Why didn't you take it?" Colt said. Pete was quiet for a moment. "My mother raised me a certain way," he said finally, "and she's sick, not dead. She can still find out things I do." He turned his hat in his hands. "Also," he stopped, "say it." The morning after Miss Evelyn arrived, She came out and fixed the board on the back porch. Pete kept his eyes on his hat. Nobody's fixed anything on this ranch in 2 years without being told 3 times. She just saw it needed doing and did it. He paused. Felt wrong to sell out someone like that. Colt looked at him for a long moment. Your mother's medical bills, he said. That's not your... How much? Pete went still. Boss? How much, Pete? Pete told him. Colt nodded once. Talk to Garrett. We'll work something out with your wages. Pete stared at him. You don't have to do that. I know I don't. Colt stood up. That's why I'm doing it. He put on his hat. Get the east fence assessed. I want to know what those men damaged. Pete stood, put on his own hat, and started down the steps. Then he stopped. For what it's worth, he said without turning around. She's good for this place. Miss Evelyn. A pause. I know it started strange, but she's good for it. Colt looked at the mountains. Yeah, he said. She is. Seed. The letter from Philadelphia arrived 10 days later. Evelyn recognized the handwriting on the envelope before she recognized anything else about it, and the recognition did something immediate and involuntary to her breathing. She stood in the main room with it in her hand for a full minute before she opened it. Her father's handwriting was careful. It had always been careful, every word measured, every sentence constructed with the particular attention of a man who was very conscious of how he was presenting himself, even on paper, even in private. She read it twice. Then she folded it and sat down. Colt came in from outside 20 minutes later and found her at the table with the folded letter in front of her and her hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee and her eyes somewhere far away. He sat down across from her without asking. She pushed the letter toward him. He read it. It was not an apology exactly. It was a man trying to write an apology without fully accepting what the apology would mean, which meant it was more honest in its way than a clean apology would have been. Her father described the debt, described the desperation, described the moment Nathaniel had made the offer, and how he'd told himself it wasn't as bad as it was. I told myself you would come to accept it, her father had written. I told myself Nathaniel was a reasonable man. I told myself a great many things that were convenient to tell myself. I have been cooperating with the federal investigators for the past week. Whatever I can provide to ensure his prosecution, I am providing. It does not undo what I agreed to. I understand that. I do not know if you will come home. I am not asking you to. I am asking you to know that whatever home meant to you before this, whatever it should have meant, I failed to protect it. That failure belongs to me. Colt set the letter down. He looked at Evelyn. Her face was doing something controlled and difficult, the specific expression of a person feeling something large and refusing to let it flatten them. He cooperated, she said. Yes. He helped build the case. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. That doesn't fix it. No, Colt said. It doesn't. It's not enough. No. But it's... She stopped. Her jaw tightened. It's something, she said, very quietly, like she hadn't expected to arrive at that, and wasn't sure how she felt about arriving there. Colt reached across the table. He put his hand over hers, not saying anything, not offering a resolution she hadn't reached yet, just putting his hand there, and she turned hers over and held it, and they sat like that for a while, with the Montana light coming through the window, and the sound of Noah in the yard outside, calling for Garrett about something. He's never going to be the father I needed him to be, Evelyn said. Probably not. I know that. I know you do. She looked at their joined hands on the table. Is it weak, she said, to decide that's enough? That what he did helps enough to not forgive, but... It's not weak, Colt said. It's practical. You can carry it with you for the rest of your life, or you can put it down somewhere and keep moving. He paused. I didn't put mine down for a long time. Took longer than it should have. She looked at him. What made you put it down? He met her eyes. Something worth moving toward, he said. She held his gaze. Then she squeezed his hand once and let go and picked up her cold coffee. I'm going to write him back, she said. Not today, but eventually. All right. It won't be a warm letter. I'd be concerned if it was. She almost smiled. I'm also going to need more paper. I've been making notes. She pulled a folded sheet from her coat pocket. About the school. He blinked. The school. There are 14 children within riding distance of Black Hollow who have no access to formal education. Miners' daughters mostly. 3 orphaned boys on the Hennessy spread. She unfolded the paper covered in her precise angular handwriting, the same hand that had marked his contracts. I want to open a school, not a church room arrangement with someone's Bible and good intentions. A real school with a curriculum and books ordered from back east and a proper building. Colt looked at the paper, then at her. On my land, he said. On your land, she said. If you'll allow it. He leaned back in his chair. He had the expression of a man watching something inevitable arrive from a long way off and realizing he's glad it's come. You'll need lumber, he said. I know. Garrett knows a man in Billings who owes me a favor. I was hoping you'd say that. He stood up and went to get more coffee, and Evelyn Cross spread her notes across Colt Mercer's kitchen table and started working. And somewhere outside in the yard, Noah was laughing at something, really laughing, the full-throated kind, that sounds like a child who has remembered that laughter is available, and the sound came through the walls and filled the room, and neither of them mentioned it, and both of them heard it. Hi. Spring came the way it always does in Montana, not gently, not all at once, but in arguments. Cold one day, almost warm the next. Snow retreating an inch at a time from the foothills. The creek running fast with meltwater. The horses restless. The school went up in March. Garrett's man in Billings came through on the lumber. Pete built the desks. Marta sewed curtains without being asked, and pretended it had nothing to do with sentiment. Danny, who turned out to have excellent penmanship, helped Evelyn address the letters to the book suppliers back east. The first morning, 7 children came. By the third week, 11. By the time April was fully established, there were 16 children in a room built for 20, and Evelyn was writing her second order of books, and a woman from the town proper had come to ask if there was room for her daughter, and Evelyn had said yes before she'd finished the sentence. Colt watched all of this with the quiet attention he gave to everything but differently than before. Not guarded, not sealed, just present. The way you watch something good happen when you're close enough to it that it's partly yours. The county judge who rode up in April was not the bought judge from Philadelphia. He was a weathered, practical man from Billings who had read the federal case file on Nathaniel Barron 3 times and arrived at the ranch with 2 questions and a document. The woman known as Evelyn Cross, he said, sitting at Colt's kitchen table, is named in Barron's legal complaint as a contracted party. As of yesterday, that complaint has been formally dismissed. The contract itself has been ruled fraudulent and unenforceable under federal law. He pushed the document across the table to Evelyn. You are free, in every legal definition of that word. Evelyn looked at the document. She looked at it for a long time. Free, she said. Yes, ma'am. She nodded once. Then she folded it carefully and held it in both hands. Thank you, she said. The judge left. The kitchen went quiet. Colt was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, watching her. He'd been there since the judge arrived, steady and present, the way he was present for everything, not inserting himself just there. How does it feel? He said. She thought about it. Like taking off something heavy, she said. Something I'd been wearing so long I forgot it wasn't part of me. Good heavy or bad heavy? She looked up at him. You know which kind. He did. He pushed off the doorframe and crossed the kitchen, and she stood, and he folded her into his arms, the way you fold something you mean to keep carefully, completely, and she put her forehead against his shoulder and just breathed. You could go anywhere now, he said. Quietly. Factually. Philadelphia, back east, anywhere. I know, she said into his shoulder, but you're not going. No. His arms tightened slightly. Why not? She pulled back and looked up at him. Because I didn't rebuild a school on your land just to leave it, she said. Because Noah is reading 3 grade levels above where he started, and he's going to need someone to keep challenging him. Because Garrett still needs the South Water Rights contract reviewed before summer. She held his gaze. Because this is mine now. This ranch, this school, these people. You. She said it without flinching. You are mine and I am yours, and I stopped being temporary the same moment you did, and you know exactly when that was. He looked at her. Something in his face went through a series of adjustments, the sealed expression, the controlled expression, all the carefully maintained distances between himself and the world, and they came down one by one, like shutters opened on a house that's been closed for too long. The barn, he said. The barn, she agreed. He kissed her, not the way they'd kissed in the barn, not desperate, not furious, not the collision of 2 people falling toward each other. This was different. This was chosen, deliberate. The kiss of 2 people who are not falling anywhere because they have already arrived. It was an evening in late May when Noah asked the question that had apparently been in his mind for some time. He was sitting on the porch steps with Evelyn supposedly doing arithmetic, but the arithmetic had been set aside in favor of a question he'd been building up to for 10 minutes. She could see it in the way he kept starting sentences and stopping. Are you going to marry him? He said. Actually marry him, not the first story. Evelyn looked at him. What makes you ask that? She said. Because you live here, Noah said, and you run the school here, and you fix the board on the back porch, and you know where everything in the kitchen goes, and Uncle Colt looks at you the way he looks at the mountains, like they're not going anywhere, and he's glad. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. That's very observant, she said. I'm 9, Noah said. I notice things. She looked at the mountains he'd described. The evening light was doing something extraordinary to them, turning the peaks gold and amber and the deep saturated blue of a day about to become a night. I think, she said carefully, that we're still working out the details. Noah considered this. He's slow, he said. She pressed her lips together to keep from laughing. He is a little slow, she agreed. You should probably just tell him what you want. Noah. He responds better to direct statements, Noah said with the authoritative confidence of someone who has observed this empirically. If you hint at things, he just waits. I've noticed that. Footsteps on the porch behind them. Colt came out and stopped when he saw their faces. What? He said. Nothing, they both said simultaneously. He looked between them with the particular wariness of a man who has walked into a conversation that stopped being about arithmetic some time ago. He sat on the steps on Evelyn's other side and looked at the mountains too, and for a while none of them said anything, and the evening settled around them like something that knew where it belonged. So, Evelyn said eventually, was I a good wife for one night? Colt turned and looked at her. His expression was the open version, the one she'd had to wait for, the one that cost him something every time he let her see it. The one she'd stopped taking for granted the moment she understood what it meant for a man like him to offer it. You fixed a broken board on the second morning, he said. Organized a pantry. Read 3 legal contracts by firelight. Made biscuits that convinced Garrett you were worth keeping. Told a 9-year-old boy the truth about not always knowing what to do. He held her gaze. You stopped me from doing something I'd have had to carry for the rest of my life. You wrote a letter to your father that you didn't owe him. You built a school on my land with borrowed lumber and penmanship lessons from Danny. He reached over and took her hand. You stopped being temporary, he said, the moment you kissed me back. The mountains caught the last of the light. Noah beside them returned to his arithmetic with the satisfied expression of someone whose assessment has been confirmed. Months later, when the story of what happened in Black Hollow that winter had traveled as far as stories travel across counties, across saloons, across the particular grapevine of a place where people still pay attention to what their neighbors do, it was told in different ways by different people. The town merchants told it as a story about a railroad man who overreached. Garrett told it as a story about what happens when you hire men with guns instead of men with principles. Pete told it as a story about a woman who fixed a porch board and made him think twice about $500. Noah told it the most accurately, which was unusual for a 9-year-old. He told it as a story about a woman who didn't know where she was going and a man who didn't know what he was waiting for, and how the blizzard put them in the same room long enough for both of them to figure it out. And Evelyn, when she was asked, and she was asked by the miners' daughters who came to her school and wanted to know how the teacher had come to be there, told it the simplest way. "I got on the wrong train," she said, "and ended up exactly where I was supposed to be." Colt Mercer never told it. He wasn't a man who told stories about himself. But on the anniversary of the blizzard, he found on the sideboard in the main room a freshly annotated legal contract. The water rights dispute he'd finally gotten around to resolving with a note in Evelyn's handwriting at the bottom that said simply, "Third clause. Still your best one." He kept the note in his coat pocket for a week before he realized he was doing it. Then he kept it there on purpose. In the end, that was the whole story. Two people who had both spent a long time building walls against the specific kind of loss that comes from wanting something and losing it, meeting in a storm, and choosing with their eyes open to come in from the cold. The school stood. The ranch held. Noah grew. The contracts stayed sound. And every evening when the mountains went gold, Colt Mercer sat on his porch with his wife beside him, his real wife, his chosen wife. The woman who had walked into the wrong saloon and fixed his broken board and kissed him in a barn and built something out of what he'd left standing, and neither of them needed to say anything, because everything worth saying was already there. Some people never find the place where they belong. Some find it on the other side of the most frightening door they've ever opened. And some are lucky enough to find it in the heart of the person who scared them most, and to discover when they finally stop running and turn around and look that it had been waiting for them the whole time.